Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial, and today we've got a picture's worth 1,000 words for you that's very special because we have moved forward in time to the era of moving pictures. Now, today's video isn't a talkie. There's no sound. There isn't even orchestral music playing in the grandstand. It's a silent film. It is color footage, which was taken by one of Battleship New Jersey's crew members during the Korean War. So this footage is by Ensign Murray Luftglass, and he served on board the ship from 1952 to 1953. And we believe that most of this footage is from 1953 during our second Korean War deployment. So we're going to go through, we're not going to watch all of his footage, we'll do a selection. It's about 50% the ship, and about 50% him walking around on shore. I can't say with 100% certainty that this footage is lined up chronologically, which makes it difficult to identify where they are on shore. And this guy's walking around on Liberty, so have less to say about that. We'll talk about the footage with the ship in it, and maybe we'll release the whole thing at some future date. Otherwise, this was donated as a digital file to the museum by Ensign Luftglass's family. Do we know when it was donated?
Very early.
And I believe this was donated within the last year. So this is my first time actually seeing the footage. So we are at the 12-second mark on the video. And right off the bat, there's a couple of cool things here to see. First off, look at the roof of Turret 2's turret. You get a really good idea here of the deck gray paint versus the haze gray on the side. You can also see that that deck is very blonde in color, that the teak has been very well holystoned. The ship looks really good here, which makes sense given it's the beginning of an active deployment. She is leaving Norfolk and heading towards the Far East, so she should be in tip-top condition at this point, and it sure looks like it. At this point, 1953, the ship is just about a decade old, and she's seen about 8 years of active service during that time. Primarily in wartime, so 5 of those 8 years in wartime. But the really interesting thing to point out here, on top of turret 2, you can see that there's a really short railing. And that railing no longer exists. Or rather, it doesn't exist like that. If you go on Iowa, Missouri, and Wisconsin, you will see they still have this turret top railing. Now, the railing is like 2 inches tall. It's not actually protecting you from anything. New Jersey no longer has it there. She has her rail sticking out the side of the turret instead of coming out of the top. So it's really interesting to see that New Jersey wasn't built like that. She originally had it on top. It's also interesting to see, if we let this keep going to the 13-second mark, you can see turret 1 doesn't have a railing at all. And it does now, but it's a side railing, not a top railing. So what are these railings for? It's for tying down the ship's awning. The awning has a bunch of grommets on all the edges, and so you're lacing it through the grommet and then around that rail and then back through and back around, back through, back around. To me, it seems like it would make more sense to have it on top of the turret like this. One, it's a little bit taller, just a few inches, but a little bit taller, and that means you're going to get a greater angle on the awning, which means it'll shed water better. But two, you can have guys climb up on the turret and lace it pretty easily when the rail's on the top, as opposed to when it's on the side, you're primarily under it on a ladder doing that work. So I'm not sure why at one point it was moved. potentially it was removed entirely. I can't think of any images of awnings on the ship in Vietnam, so they might have cut them all off and in the 80s put it back on the side. I can't say for certain. I always thought New Jersey had a side mount and was just built like that. The other Iowas, some of them had top mounted, and maybe it was based on where they were built or something else. This is certainly far from the only difference between the ships. But it is now interesting from this video for the very first time to see that no, it seems like the Iowas all had it on top of the turrets, or at least on top of some of the turrets. And then at a certain point, it's moved for some unknown reason. So something that we're going to look back into in the future as we go through videos and footage. We'll start to look at where that railing is. We're answering the big questions here on this channel. Another interesting thing laying there on the deck between the turrets is the ship's accommodation brow. You can see it's got brown wooden treads and gray metal sides. The accommodation brow would be able to hang off the side of the ship at a movable angle, would be suspended by a J-davit that's on the deck, and then it's basically a stairway that you can walk down to get to the ship's boats when you're in port. There would be one at the bow, one at the stern, and all the treads are hinged so that they can rotate depending on whether the ladder's more flush like a traditional gangway or whether it's at a pretty steep angle to climb down the ship's hull to get to the boat. It would be parallel to the hull of the ship so that you would have the hull of the ship on your side as you're walking down the ladder to get to the boat. This is one of the things that we're still looking for here on the Battleship. Like I said, we should have two of these. One would be mounted near the bow of the ship outside the wardroom. We've still got the brackets for it, but no accommodation brow. Ours would be about 25 feet long. So it's interesting to see the ship might just be coming out of port or going into port, which is why it's laid out here on deck instead of mounted on the bulkhead. So they might be getting it ready to deploy, or it could just be that some fantastically nice weather you can see here. The deck division might have it laid out to do work on it, to sand the wood and revarnish it or something like that. So this is the forward accommodation brow, which means it's the one that the officers use as opposed to the aft one that the enlisted sailors use. Interestingly, you can see there's an officer standing there in a bridge coat. It comes down to about his knees. You can see several other guys. They're wearing the blue wool uniforms. That makes sense for the beginning of the deployment. New Jersey arrives in country, I want to say in mid-March, mid to late March, which means that she's sailing from Norfolk probably in January or February. So makes sense, winter, they're going to be wearing their bridge coats and their blue uniforms. Let's keep watching here. So some great footage at the 14-second mark here of the bow of the ship. You can see the ship's two forward 40mm guns still there. You can see the extreme bow, and you can see that 50mm, you can see that 20mm gun tub has been removed. There was a pulpit at the bow that had two originally single 20mm guns. In June of 1945, we got twin 20mm guns, and those were retained until likely sometime during our first Korean War deployment. And we believe that New Jersey and Missouri's were removed in Yokosuka. All the 20mm are removed. They had been there essentially to shoot mines. At this point, the 20mm is not effective against aircraft. Aircraft just move too quickly. They're too much larger than they were during World War II. And the 20mm just doesn't have the stopping power, even the twin 20mm. So they were primarily there for mines, and then really early on in the deployment, they're removed. Interestingly, New Jersey and Missouri get ours removed and the pulpit removed, and then they replate along the edge of the bulwark just to help block water there at the bow. Wisconsin and Iowa have their guns removed, but the pulpits remain in place. So what that tells me is it depends on what port they were in. All four Iowas are home ported out of Norfolk, which doesn't make much sense because they're all deploying to Korea in rotation. You'd have one off the coast at any given time, and one in transit at any given time, one in dry dock, and one doing training. So, and the rotation was Missouri first. Remember, she was the one that was retained in service past 1948. So she didn't have to be reactivated in 1950 like the other Iowas. New Jersey is the first one brought back, so she goes out and relieves Missouri, and then they just retain that place in the rotation. In fact, in this video, we're going to see New Jersey relieving Missouri for the second time. That'll be in a little bit later. And then New Jersey is relieved, I believe, by Iowa. It could be Wisconsin. And then that one is relieved by the other. And then Missouri relieves that one, so on and so forth. They rotated through to the point that New Jersey and the one that relieves her each do 2 deployments. The last one only does 1 deployment. Missouri gets 3 deployments in before the war ends. Because, again, she was in service longer than the others during this time period. We believe that Missouri and New Jersey have theirs removed in Yokosuka, and Wisconsin and Iowa have theirs removed back in Norfolk. Ooh! I'm not entirely sure which superstructure-mounted 40mm gun we're looking at right now. It's the 16-second mark. But just next to that gun, you can see a spud locker. Spud lockers, very common on ships of this period. They are always mounted topside, to my knowledge, and it's where you store all the potatoes. And it's just like, it looks a lot like a ready service ammunition locker, but it's got ventilation slits cut into it. And so you just have these spud lockers on board. I suspect New Jersey would have had a couple. And they're just filled with regular potatoes. And that's where like all the Popeye cartoons come from, where he's sitting there peeling potatoes every time he does something wrong. Pull them out of the spud locker, however many you need for the next mess, and go through and peel them. By the 1980s, we no longer have our spud lockers. No evidence of where they were mounted. I'm sure I could find them on the blueprints, but have never really thought about it or looked on this ship. In the 1980s, they're just doing like powdered potatoes. I doubt that they had real potatoes that you're... Well, I say that, but there is a steam-powered potato peeler in the vegetable prep room. So now I wonder if they would have just had sacks of potatoes in one of the storage spaces for dry stores instead of a spud locker. Huh. It's interesting. You can see that the spud locker is painted a much lighter color than the 40mm gun mount behind it, which again is reminiscent of the ready service lockers. You don't want the ready service lockers to absorb too much solar heat because you don't want the powder inside to get too hot. So you paint it lighter colors than the rest of the ship, which is often in a darker camouflage scheme. I guess the same applies for potatoes. Never really thought about it. And unfortunately, it's such a close cropped shot, I can't quite tell where we are in this footage. The gun overhangs, which tells us it's one of the superstructure mounts, which doesn't narrow it down much. There's 6 on the main deck, and then 2 on the turret, so that still leaves 12 mounts that it could be. We got some footage of the ship's wake at the 19-second mark, 18 and 19 seconds. Looks like the ship is doing a wide turn. That might be reminiscent of the ship preparing to come into port, changing her course significantly. Looks like it's at least 90 degrees. Because typically you just put the ship on the course you need to go and you go straight. Not really worried about North Korean submarines at this point. I doubt New Jersey did any zigzagging, particularly when she's transiting to theater, which I believe we still are. But again, we're not entirely sure that this footage is in chronological order. All right, so here we are at the 34-second mark. The footage had some panning shots looking at a landmass, and then we got a hard cut, and now we're in a port, and we're looking at another Iowa-class battleship. My suspicion is we are still on New Jersey looking at another Iowa. Now, I haven't quite figured out yet, are we in Hawaii and this is an Iowa that's in transit somewhere else? Are we in Yokosuka where we would do the transit with Missouri? So let's watch a little bit more and see what we can see. Yeah, so panning to the 37-second mark, the camera comes around and you can see that there are a lot of sailors in their blue uniforms on the ship. So we are on New Jersey looking at a different Iowa. But since it's stern on, haven't had any of my indicators yet of which Iowa it is. Okay, so now we're at the 55-second mark. I was starting to think there's no way that this is Pearl Harbor because of some of the terrain features we were seeing. And now it's showed some local boats out here, and they definitely are not the type that you would expect to see in Hawaii. I suspect we're in Yokosuka, just coming into port for the first time to relieve Missouri. All right, so here we have... Here we're at the 58-second mark. We've got the sailors manning the rails. We have the Marines all in formation. This is cool. One of the Marines has a guidon, a red banner. I think it's going to say USS New Jersey. The flag is red. There's gold lace around the edge, or fringe, I should say, and gold lettering on it. I think it says USS NJ. We have one of those Marine guidons on display that's from the 80s. I suspect it is a newly made one, but it's just interesting that that tradition continues on. Obviously, standard bearing dates all the way back to ancient times. How does a general on a horse on top of the hill manage his units on the battlefield? Oftentimes those units would have specific flags so he can tell this unit or that unit to go where they're supposed to go. We have hieroglyphic written stuff on Egyptian tombs that talk about the army being broken into 4 divisions, each named after a different god of the Egyptian pantheon, and how the pharaoh is commanding the Ra division to attack over here on the Osiris division to be on the right flank of that, and things like that. So this goes back to like the Bronze Age, 5,000 years ago. That said, command and control has gotten a lot better. It is interesting that tradition has carried all the way forward to the present day, even though we don't really need individual units to carry their flags for command and control. Okay, so here at the 1 minute and 2 second mark, you can see that the accommodation brow is rigged. Some really nice varnished dark wood, and you can see that we've got a gentleman in civilian clothes coming up, and we are manning the rails. We've got 8 side boys and someone with a bosun's pipe. The number of side boys corresponds to the rank of the person coming on board, so higher rank, more side boys, which indicates that this is a very important person. And I know that in March of 1953, Korean President Syngman Rhee comes on board the ship, and I believe that is who we are seeing here in this suit. And that certainly makes sense why the railings are being manned, and the crew's in dress uniforms and all of that. 1 minute 14, you can see that they have done a lap around the crew, typical inspection. You can see that the ship's band is out on deck playing. Now, 1:15, you can see that there is an admiral's barge coming alongside. This is very cool. It's got the 4-star flag on the bow. So that probably means that this is Jocko Clark transferring his flag to Battleship New Jersey. He's the commander of 7th Fleet, and he will fly his flag from New Jersey for much of her Second Korean War deployment. Also coming on board during this conference is U.S. Ambassador Briggs and and Lieutenant General Maxwell B. Taylor, who will be taking over 8th Army in June. Here we are at the minute 39-second mark. You can see that the South Korean flag is flying alongside the American flag on the ship's mainmast. Even though none of the footage has been close enough up to guarantee that that's Sinmin Ray, the fact that this flag here is flying gives me pretty good evidence that that's the case, and therefore that gives me pretty good evidence that this is March 1953 when the battleship is in Yokosuka, Japan. Oh yeah, and here at the minute 41 mark, you can see that there's another barge coming alongside flying the South Korean flag from the bow. Remember earlier we saw that 4-star flag at the bow, denoting that that was Admiral Clark's barge. Here it's the South Korean flag, so this is the President's barge. Well, somehow I spent 20 minutes talking about the first 2 minutes of this video. So we're going to end this part here. Maybe next week we'll post some more footage. After this, there's a couple of minutes of, I suspect it's Liberty in Yokosuka. So we might come back in the future a couple minutes further into the video the next time the ship is shown. If you guys like this footage and me talking for 10 minutes about 1 minute of footage, let us know in the comment section down below, and we'll keep making some videos in this series until you've gotten to see all the footage of the ship we have from this very cool new collection. What do you think was the coolest thing we were able to learn now that we've seen this previously unseen footage? Let us know in the comment section down below. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. For today's video, we'd like to thank the Luftklasse family for donating their family members' effects, including this footage of his time on board the ship. It is helping us deepen our understanding of the vessel. If you're a former crew member, remember that we would love to have your artifacts as well, and it'll help us learn more about the ship. There's a link in the description below to donate, which gives us the time to do this sort of research. You can also support the museum by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find about our museum and our channel. Thanks for watching.